Before we get on with the podcast, I wanted to let everyone know that I have 3 books available for sale on Kindle. Recommended Reading for the True Conservative, Bad Democrat, and Evil Liberal. All of them available for $3.99. And now, on with the podcast.
The Army takes the fun out of everything. The Army could take the fun out of a water slide. Get down that water slide, Warren. Slide, Warren. Slide, Warren. That is not the proper water slide position, Warren. Arms perpendicular to the slide. Mouth wide open as to indicate having fun on the slide. Slide, Warren. Slide, Warren. Slide, 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 slide. Get off my water slide. Tomorrow we will add water to the slide.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rule Saturday, August the 15th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for retrogrades, and the Mossad. All that and more when I get back. God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Thank you. Now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
For all the quantifiable variables available to modern economics, capitalism is not a technical or scientific system. It is basically a system for diffusing authority and decision-making power and letting people have what they want. It argues that since market success is a matter of speaking to people's preferences, leaving decisions at the level of the individual exchange is almost always going to work better to produce more wealth and more happiness. That doesn't mean society has to live at the mercy of base and degraded preferences, but it means we get beyond them by educating people's preferences and judgments rather than by taking them over, by moral education, not by rational control. Yuval Levin. We do not doubt the need for a civilized society to be socially organized by some framework. The question is, which framework will create the best outcome? A centralized command-control one, or one in which free people individually transact, each in pursuit of a better life? This question does answer itself to some degree, but we err to ignore the final portion of Levin's exhortation. Wise and moral discernment sits at the foundation of optimal social organization in a market economy.
And that was No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Thank you. Now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 7. Never let radical mischief go unpunished. Make a stink about everything. Mod cons are habitually cowardly and lazy, but they fancy themselves magnanimous, charitable, and wise, whitewashing their indifferentism and chronic failure to react to grievous insults as stateliness and poise and being the bigger man, and all sorts of other delirious euphemisms. Mod cons have afforded radicals so much leniency in deportment and speech that radicals now believe that they can say and do anything to a retrograde without fear of reproach. It is this abdication of the duty to counterpunch that has allowed the conduct of radicals to devolve to its current critical level of vile coarseness. It is this abdication of the duty to well with righteous anger that has enabled the Antifa mob to run amok through large portions of various urban areas, committing batteries on innocent passerby with impunity. It is this abdication of the duty to defend our honor that has relegated those not on board with radical propaganda to de facto second-class citizen status. Radicals have successfully handed down to Western society an unofficial but despotic code of conduct. They have shuttered our ability to speak truth freely. They have set forth rules dictating what sorts of things we may joke about without running afoul of the thought police. They've narrowed our styles of dress and personal adornment by admonishing us about cultural appropriation. They've dictated the proper ratio for women and minority appearances in movies and television. They've twisted our arms to make us pretend that men who grow out their hair, shave their Adam's apples, speak with a phony lisp, and wear gaudy dresses are actually women. And the way that radicals have been able to get society to accede to their fell new code of conduct is by grievance mongering. They gripe, complain, and take offense about everything that doesn't conform to their bizarre sensibilities. But not only do they gripe, complain, and take offense, they also call corporate offices, write letters to Congress, picket businesses, and threaten boycotts. In fact, they have special institutions like the Corporate Accountability Project dedicated to policing whether businesses are sufficiently woke or if they need to be cudgeled into compliance with the new code of conduct. Radicals' reactionary impulse, along with their assiduous commitment to following their initial umbrage with tangible demands for redress, often at the point of an economic bayonet, is the reason that we feel a subconscious pang of guilt when we say something true but politically incorrect. It's the reason that all burglars in home security commercials have to be Caucasian, despite the fact that blacks and Hispanics have a much higher crime rate per capita. It's the reason that in crime shows, hotshot lawyers at top law firms are reliably depicted as being sassy women, despite the fact that the overwhelming number of top law firm partners are men. It's the reason we have to call Bruce Jenner Caitlyn. It's the reason we have to pretend fat women make suitable fashion models. It's the reason we have to pretend that rap and graffiti are art. It's the reason we have to pretend that wives and not husbands are the head of households. Retrogrades need to reassert our fighting spirit. When we witness an injustice, when we see a serious breach of decorum or decency, when marketing departments choose to make us the butt of their jokes, we need to get mad. And we need to actualize the potential energy of our initial anger into hot, messy, kinetic energy by protesting, writing letters, making phone calls, and organizing non-monolithic boycotts. For too long have we abided white men being universally portrayed on television as fat, stupid, subservient slobs. For too long have we tolerated razor companies that scolded men for toxic masculinity. For too long have we allowed major retailers to peddle slutty nun costumes in the run-up to Halloween. For too long have we watched an NFL that mandates that grown men wear pink to raise money for a disease that primarily affects women. For too long have we let Tide commercials show emasculated house dads doing laundry on weekdays while their careerist wives are at work. For too long have we let Antifa bully old women. For too long have we allowed unfunny, loud-mouthed comedians to celebrate abortion publicly and cut the head off of Trump effigies. For too long have we patronized anti-American Hollywood movies and award shows. For too long have we financed an NBA that boycotts states because they don't let psychologically unstable and sexually confused men use women's restrooms. For too long have we let homosexual depravity be thrust in our faces in commercials and sitcoms. Tolerate this abuse no longer. As Dylan Thomas exhorts, do not go gentle into that good night. It's time to get mad and resolve ourselves to punishing radical mischief. Verbally chastise wrongdoers. Seek to get those who use employment positions to advance radicalism fired from their jobs. Flood customer feedback centers with letters and negative reviews. Do anything, and do it loudly and with aplomb. But most of all, stop doing nothing. The only way to stop a bully is by punching him in the mouth. Hard.
And that was Rule 7 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Mossad.
Vienna, Austria, September 23rd, 2012, 7:45 in the evening. A man in a tailored charcoal suit walks through the Galerie Neuer Markt, his private art gallery located in Vienna's prestigious First District. He moves slowly between the white walls, pausing before a large abstract canvas, tilting his head as if contemplating some profound meaning in the chaotic splashes of color. His name is Faisal al-Rashidi, though most people in Vienna know him simply as Rashidi, a wealthy art collector and gallery owner with impeccable taste and deeper pockets. What they don't know is that the 42-year-old standing before them, sipping champagne and discussing the merits of contemporary European artists, is one of the most prolific terror financiers in the Middle East. And what Rashidi doesn't know, as he admires the painting he purchased for 300,000 euros at a Paris auction, is that across the street, 3 floors up, in an office building whose windows face directly into his gallery, 2 Mossad snipers have been watching him for 6 consecutive days. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence turned a terror financier's love of art into the perfect assassination opportunity. How they spent 18 months planning an operation that would last exactly 60 seconds. And how they pulled off one of the most precise, targeted killings in modern intelligence history, in the heart of a European capital, in broad daylight, while the target stood surrounded by priceless art. Here's what makes this operation absolutely insane. Rashidi thought he was safe. Vienna had become his sanctuary, specifically because Austria maintained strict neutrality. Israeli intelligence operations on Austrian soil are forbidden by diplomatic agreement. If Mossad got caught running operations in Vienna, it would create an international incident that could damage relations with one of Europe's most strategically important neutral countries. Rashidi had chosen Vienna precisely because he believed the Israelis couldn't touch him there. He was wrong. The gallery opening that evening was a small affair. 20 guests, all carefully vetted. Art collectors, wealthy patrons, a few journalists from European art publications. Rashidi was celebrating the acquisition of several new pieces for his permanent collection. He'd spent the last 3 months in Paris, London, and Geneva, attending auctions, meeting with dealers, building relationships with the kind of people who moved 8-figure artworks between private collections. His gallery had become one of Vienna's most respected contemporary art spaces. Critics praised his curatorial vision. Collectors sought his expertise. He'd built a reputation as someone with genuine aesthetic sensibility, not just money. But every euro Rashidi spent on art came from blood. The money flowed from Hezbollah accounts in Lebanon, through shell companies in Cyprus, into Austrian bank accounts registered to legitimate businesses that Rashidi controlled. He'd purchased the gallery 3 years earlier for 2.4 million euros, using money that had originally been earmarked for weapons purchases. Rashidi's path to becoming a terror financier started in Beirut in the late 1990s. He'd been born in Kuwait to a wealthy family, educated at the American University of Beirut, and initially worked in legitimate banking. Smart, charismatic, fluent in Arabic, English, French, and German, he was exactly the kind of person international banks wanted representing them in the Middle East. But somewhere during his time in Beirut, he made connections with Hezbollah's financial network. Maybe it was ideological. Maybe it was opportunistic. Maybe he just saw an opportunity to make more money than any legitimate bank would ever pay him. By 2003, he was moving money for multiple terrorist organizations. Not just Hezbollah, but Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and various Syrian militant groups. He became invaluable because he understood Western financial systems. He knew how to move money through legitimate channels in ways that were nearly impossible to trace. He didn't use the obvious methods that counterterrorism financial units had learned to detect. He used art. Art is the perfect money laundering vehicle. Prices are subjective. A painting might sell at auction for 50,000 euros or 5 million euros, depending on who's bidding and what narrative the auction house creates around it. Art transactions often involve private sales where neither buyer nor seller is publicly disclosed. Shipping valuable art across international borders is routine and doesn't trigger the same scrutiny as moving equivalent amounts of cash. Rashidi would purchase art at inflated prices using terrorist money. The seller, often someone connected to the network, would receive clean money from the sale. Then Rashidi would either keep the art, building his gallery's collection, or resell it later at a loss that didn't matter because the money was already laundered. Israeli intelligence had been tracking him since 2007. Shin Bet identified him through intercepted communications between Hezbollah operatives discussing financial transfers. Mossad built a comprehensive file over 5 years. They knew he'd moved approximately $40 million through art transactions. They knew this money had funded operations that killed Israeli civilians. They knew he was planning to expand his network, recruiting other financiers to replicate his methods. They tried legal approaches first. They passed intelligence to European authorities, hoping Austria or Switzerland would prosecute him for money laundering. But proving art-based money laundering requires evidence that's almost impossible to obtain. You need documentation showing the buyer and seller coordinated to inflate prices deliberately. You need witnesses willing to testify. You need financial records that people like Rashidi never keep in accessible locations. The operation began in March 2012, 6 months before the shooting. Mossad's planning team, working from a secure facility outside Tel Aviv, spent weeks studying Vienna's first district, examining every building with sightlines to Rashidi's gallery. They needed a location that offered a clear view into the gallery's main exhibition space, was close enough for an accurate shot, and could be accessed without raising suspicion. They identified a 7-story office building directly across Herrengasse, the narrow street where Rashidi's gallery occupied a ground floor space in a renovated 18th century building. The office building was mixed use, housing accounting firms, legal offices, consulting companies, and various small businesses. Perfect. A single empty office wouldn't attract attention. In April, a Swiss consulting firm called Alpen Strategies GmbH inquired about renting office space on the building's 4th floor. The firm's website showed they specialized in advising European companies on Middle Eastern market expansion. Their credentials were impeccable. They had client testimonials, published white papers, and a Zurich address that checked out when the building's management company verified it. What the building management didn't know was that Alpen Strategies existed solely on paper, created by Mossad specifically for this operation. The office they rented was perfect. Corner unit, 2 large windows facing Herrengasse, direct view into Rashidi's gallery approximately 47 meters away. The lease was signed for 1 year, though Mossad knew they'd only need it for a few months. The monthly rent was 2,800 euros. Small price for a kill zone. Over the next 3 months, 2 men, claiming to be Alpen Strategies consultants, established a routine presence at the office. They'd arrive around 9 in the morning, leave around 6 in the evening, occasionally staying later. They met with a few actual clients, people who'd been approached by Mossad operatives posing as business development representatives, offering legitimate consulting services at rates low enough to be attractive. The consultants were professional, friendly, and unremarkable. Building security saw them as just another boring consulting firm. What security didn't see was that these consultants were Mossad operatives conducting surveillance on Rashidi. They photographed him through telephoto lenses. They timed his routines. They noted when he was alone in the gallery, when he had guests, when his security was present. They mapped every angle, every sightline, every potential complication. By September, they knew Rashidi's patterns better than he knew them himself. He typically arrived at the gallery around 10 in the morning. He'd spend the day meeting with clients, curating exhibitions, handling administrative work. He rarely left before 7 in the evening. The technical challenges of this assassination were extraordinary. This wasn't shooting at a target in an open field or from a concealed position in hostile territory. This was urban sniping through glass in a European capital from an office building where dozens of people worked daily. The shooters would be firing through 2 layers of glass, their own office window and the gallery's large street-facing windows. Each pane would deflect the bullet slightly, affecting trajectory and accuracy. The physics of shooting through glass are complex. When a bullet impacts glass at an angle, it doesn't travel straight through. The glass deflects it, changing the bullet's path unpredictably. The thicker the glass, the greater the deflection. Rashidi's gallery windows were reinforced security glass, 8 millimeters thick, designed to resist break-ins. The office window was standard double-pane construction, 4 millimeters per pane, with an air gap between. Mossad's ballistics specialists spent weeks calculating the exact variables. They built mock-ups of both window types at a training facility in Israel, testing different ammunition, different angles, different impact velocities. They needed a bullet that would maintain accuracy after passing through both barriers while still having enough energy to kill the target instantly. They selected a modified 7.62 millimeter NATO round, specifically designed for precision shooting through intermediate barriers. The rifle was a custom-built precision instrument based on the Remington Model 700 platform, fitted with a suppressor to reduce sound signature and a specialized scope calibrated for the exact distance and angle. But the weapon was only part of the equation. Wind was another complication. Even in the narrow street canyon between buildings, wind currents could affect a bullet's trajectory over 47 meters. The team installed a small weather station on the office roof, disguised as a telecommunications antenna that measured wind speed and direction in real time. Then there was timing. Rashidi was rarely alone in the gallery. He had staff, visitors, and occasional security personnel. The shooters needed him isolated, standing in a specific location where they had a clear shot for at least 15 seconds. 15 seconds to confirm identity, calculate final adjustments, and take the shot. They studied his patterns and found their window. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Rashidi stayed late after his staff left. He'd spend 30 to 45 minutes alone in the gallery, usually in the main exhibition space, reviewing pieces or simply enjoying his collection. During these periods, he was predictable. He'd walk a specific route through the gallery, pausing at certain pieces. And for those brief moments when he stood still, admiring a painting, he was vulnerable. The actual assassination team arrived in Vienna in early September, traveling separately over the course of a week to avoid any pattern that might alert Austrian intelligence. There were 5 operatives total, though only 2 would be in the office when the shot was taken. The primary sniper was a man I'll call David, a 38-year-old member of Mossad's Kidon unit, the department responsible for assassinations and high-risk operations. David had been a sniper in the Israeli Defense Forces before joining Mossad, with combat experience in Lebanon and Gaza. He'd conducted 4 previous targeted killings for Israeli intelligence, though none in a European capital under these specific conditions. His spotter and backup shooter was a woman I'll call Maya, 32 years old, also Kidon trained, with expertise in urban surveillance and counter-surveillance. Her role was to provide final calculations, watch for complications, and take the shot if David was somehow unable to. The other 3 operatives handled logistics, counter-surveillance, and extraction planning. They established safe houses across Vienna, created escape routes, monitored Austrian police communications, and ensured the team could disappear within minutes if something went wrong. But David and Maya were the critical components. They moved into the Alpen Strategies office on September 10th, officially presenting themselves as senior consultants brought in from the Zurich headquarters for a major project. They worked normal business hours, maintaining the appearance of legitimate activity. They even took actual consulting calls, providing basic business advice to the few real clients the fake firm had acquired. But every moment they weren't performing for the building's other tenants, they were preparing for the shot. The rifle had been smuggled into Austria weeks earlier, disassembled and hidden inside industrial surveying equipment that entered the country as part of a legitimate shipment to a shell company Mossad controlled. The components were transported to the office in a large equipment case that appeared to contain nothing more suspicious than laser measurement tools and technical documentation. David and Maya assembled the weapon in the office after hours, testing every component, confirming the scope was properly calibrated. They couldn't fire it, obviously, but they could verify the mechanical function and conduct dry fire drills repeatedly. They practiced the entire sequence hundreds of times. Maya would spot Rashidi through binoculars, confirm his position, calculate wind and environmental factors, and give David the final adjustments. David would acquire the target through the scope, control his breathing, and execute the shot. They timed themselves obsessively. From target identification to shot fired, they needed to complete the sequence in under 12 seconds. They got it down to 9. On September 17th, Rashidi returned to Vienna after a 3-week trip to Paris and London. Intelligence indicated he'd attended several art auctions and conducted meetings with individuals suspected of being part of his financial network. Mossad's surveillance team in those cities had tracked him throughout, gathering additional evidence of his activities, but the decision had already been made. The assassination would proceed in Vienna as planned. David and Maya began their final surveillance phase. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, they watched Rashidi through the scope and binoculars, confirming his patterns, noting any deviations, watching for security complications. Tuesday, September 18th. Rashidi stayed late, as predicted, spending 40 minutes alone in the gallery after his staff departed at 7. He walked his usual route, paused before several paintings, spent nearly 5 minutes standing motionless in front of a large canvas in the main exhibition space. Perfect. From the office, David had a clear view. Through the scope, Rashidi's head filled the reticle. The distance was 47.3 meters. The wind was minimal, less than 5 kilometers per hour. The shot would have been trivial, but this was rehearsal, not execution. They weren't ready yet. They needed to confirm the pattern held consistently, needed to ensure no unexpected variables would interfere. Thursday, September 20th. Same pattern. Rashidi stayed late, walked the gallery alone, stood before his favorite pieces. David tracked him through the scope, adjusting for the slight wind coming from the west, calculating the bullet drop over the distance. He placed the crosshairs on Rashidi's head just above the ear, where the bullet would enter and destroy the brainstem instantly. He controlled his breathing, held steady, and squeezed the trigger without actually firing. The dry fire was perfect. Maya confirmed through her binoculars that the timing worked. Rashidi stood still for 18 seconds, more than enough. They repeated this process on Saturday evening, when Rashidi made an unscheduled visit to the gallery. Again, he was alone. Again, the shot was available. The team was ready. The assassination was scheduled for Tuesday, September 25th, during Rashidi's predictable late evening routine. But then something unexpected happened. On Sunday, September 23rd, Rashidi announced through his gallery's website and social media that he was hosting an exclusive evening exhibition that very day, showcasing new acquisitions. The event would run from 7 to 9 in the evening. This wasn't part of his normal pattern. It complicated the plan because the gallery would be full of guests during the time when Rashidi was usually alone. The team had to make a decision. The operations commander, coordinating from a secure location outside Vienna, faced a critical choice. They could abort the Sunday operation and wait for the next scheduled opportunity on Tuesday. The original plan was solid, the timing rehearsed, the variables controlled. Waiting was the cautious choice, or they could adapt. Rashidi was hosting an event, but events ended. Guests would leave. There might be a window after the exhibition when he'd be alone, reviewing how the evening went, perhaps staying later than usual because of the adrenaline from hosting. It was less predictable, but it was available. The commander consulted with David and Maya. Could they execute if the opportunity presented itself that evening? David's response was immediate. Yes, they'd rehearsed enough. They knew the sight lines, the ballistics, the timing. If Rashidi gave them a clean shot, they could take it. The risk was Austrian police response time. A shooting on a Sunday evening when the streets were less crowded might draw faster attention than a midweek shooting during normal business hours. But the opportunity was too good to pass up. The authorization was given. If Rashidi provided a clear shot after his guests departed, David would take it. The team went into final preparation mode. David and Maya entered the office at 6 in the evening, well before Rashidi's exhibition began. They were dressed as they always were, business casual, looking like consultants working late on a project deadline. Building security saw them enter, noted nothing unusual. Inside the office, they moved quickly. The rifle was assembled and positioned near the window, hidden behind a desktop partition that would conceal it from anyone outside who might happen to glance at the office. Not that anyone would. The street was busy with early evening pedestrians, and people rarely look up at office windows. Maya set up her observation post with binoculars and a laser rangefinder. She confirmed the distance to the gallery, checked wind speed through their rooftop weather station, and verified sight lines. Everything was optimal. The gallery exhibition began at 7. Through their optics, David and Maya watched as guests arrived. Well-dressed art collectors, some carrying champagne glasses, moving through the space, admiring Rashidi's new acquisitions. Rashidi himself was the perfect host, moving between groups, gesturing toward paintings, explaining provenance and artistic significance. He was animated, engaged, completely at ease, and completely unaware that less than 50 meters away, two people were watching him through precision optics, waiting for everyone else to leave. The exhibition lasted longer than anticipated. By 8:30, guests were still circulating through the gallery. Some had moved into a back room where additional pieces were displayed. Others clustered near the entrance, finishing their champagne, engaging in the kind of prolonged goodbyes that characterize upscale social events. Rashidi showed no signs of rushing anyone. He was enjoying himself. Maya whispered updates to David, who remained prone behind the rifle, eye to the scope, watching. Waiting required a specific kind of discipline. You couldn't let tension build. You couldn't let your mind race through scenarios. You stayed calm, controlled your breathing, and trusted your training. By 8:45, the crowd had thinned significantly. Most guests had departed. Only 4 people remained in the gallery besides Rashidi. 2 were engaged in conversation near the entrance. 2 others were examining a sculpture in the corner of the main exhibition space. Rashidi excused himself from the conversation near the entrance and walked toward the back office, presumably to check on something administrative. He was out of view for 3 minutes. When he returned, the last 4 guests were preparing to leave. Handshakes, final compliments about the exhibition, promises to return for future events. By 9:05, the gallery was empty except for Rashidi. He locked the front door from inside, a routine security measure. He walked through the space slowly, adjusting a frame that had been knocked slightly crooked, picking up an empty champagne glass someone had left on a side table. He moved toward the back. Office again, disappeared from view for 30 seconds, then returned. He was carrying a small notepad. He walked to the center of the main exhibition space and stood before the large, abstract canvas that dominated the east wall. The same painting he'd admired countless times before. The painting David had watched him study during their rehearsal sessions. Rashidi stood motionless, looking up at the canvas, occasionally glancing down to write something in his notepad. From 47 meters away, through 2 panes of glass, David watched him through the scope. The crosshairs settled on Rashidi's head. The sight picture was perfect. Maya, observing through binoculars, checked the environmental factors one final time. Wind speed, 2.3 kilometers per hour from the west. Temperature, 14 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, standard. She calculated the final ballistic correction and whispered to David. He adjusted the scope's elevation 2 clicks. The crosshairs moved, slightly. Now they were positioned exactly where the bullet would need to impact to account for glass deflection and environmental factors. Rashidi was still standing motionless, absorbed in the painting. Maya's voice was barely audible, a whisper that carried only the essential information. Wind steady, 2.3 west, range 47.3, target stationary, clear shot. David's breathing had already slowed to the rhythm he'd practiced thousands of times, 4 seconds per breath. Inhale slowly, exhale slowly. Find the natural pause between breaths where the body is most still. That pause, lasting perhaps 2 seconds, was when the shot would be taken. His finger rested on the trigger, applying 3 pounds of pressure against the 4-pound pull weight. 1 more pound, and the rifle would fire. But he waited. Rashidi shifted his weight slightly, turning his head to examine a different section of the canvas. The crosshairs moved off target. David kept his breathing, steady, waiting for Rashidi to settle again. This was the reality of sniping that movies never captured accurately. It wasn't about taking impossible shots through chaos and movement. It was about patience, about waiting for the target to cooperate, about recognizing the perfect moment when it arrived. 15 seconds passed. Rashidi's attention returned to the center of the painting. He raised the notepad again, wrote something, then lowered his hand to his side. He stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly upward, completely absorbed in whatever aesthetic experience the painting provided. The crosshairs settled on a point just above and behind Rashidi's right ear. At this angle, the bullet would enter the temporal bone, traverse through the brainstem, and exit through the opposite side of the skull. Death would be instantaneous. The target wouldn't hear the shot, wouldn't feel pain, wouldn't have time to process what was happening. One moment he'd be standing in his gallery, contemplating art. The next moment he'd simply cease to exist. Maya watched through her binoculars, counting seconds. Rashidi had been stationary for 7 seconds. "Stable," she whispered. "You have the shot." David found the pause between breaths. His heart rate had slowed to 52 beats per minute, a physiological response to the breathing technique he'd mastered over years of training. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He increased pressure on the trigger. The rifle fired. The suppressor reduced the sound to something resembling a heavy book dropping on a wooden floor. Loud enough to be noticeable if you were listening for it, quiet enough to be dismissed as ordinary building noise by anyone who wasn't. The muzzle flash was contained within the suppressor's baffles. From outside, there was no visible indication that the rifle had fired. The bullet traveled at approximately 840 meters per second. It covered the 47.3 meters to the gallery in roughly 0.056 seconds. It struck the office window first. The double-pane glass offered minimal resistance. The bullet punched through both panes, leaving a small hole surrounded by a spider web of cracks. The deflection was exactly as calculated, less than 0.2 degrees. The bullet continued across the street, its velocity reduced by approximately 15%, but still traveling at over 700 meters per second. It struck the gallery's security glass at a slight downward angle. This was the critical moment. If the ballistic calculations were wrong, if the glass was thicker than intelligence had indicated, if the angle was off by even half a degree, the bullet would deflect unpredictably. It might miss Rashidi entirely. It might wound him non-fatally, giving him time to call for help, time for security footage to capture something useful, time for the operation to transform from clean execution to messy failure. The bullet penetrated the security glass. The deflection was within acceptable parameters, 0.3 degrees, slightly more than the office window, but still within the margin of error David had compensated for. The bullet continued its path. Rashidi was still standing motionless, still looking at the painting, still completely unaware that anything had happened. The bullet struck him precisely where David had aimed. It entered the skull just above and behind the right ear, penetrated the temporal bone, and tore through the brainstem. The hydrostatic shock from the bullet's passage through tissue caused massive trauma. The brainstem, responsible for autonomic functions like breathing and heartbeat, was destroyed instantly. Rashidi's body collapsed immediately. There was no dramatic reaction, no stumbling or grasping. His legs simply stopped supporting him, and he fell straight down, the notepad slipping from his hand and landing beside him on the gallery floor. Through the scope, David watched him fall. He observed for 3 seconds, confirming there was no movement, no indication of life. The shot had been successful. Maya was already packing the observation equipment. They had rehearsed this part as thoroughly as the shot itself. The rifle was disassembled in 45 seconds. Components were placed back into the equipment case. The spent shell casing was retrieved from where it had ejected onto the floor. The window showed the bullet hole and cracks, but they'd planned for this. They had a pre-cut section of tinted film that Maya applied over the damaged area. From street level, it would be difficult to notice anything unusual. The entire post-shot procedure took 2 minutes and 18 seconds. By the time they were finished, the office looked exactly as it had when they'd arrived. David and Maya walked out of the office building at 9:14 in the evening, 7 minutes after the shot was fired. They carried the equipment case between them, 2 consultants leaving after working late on a Sunday evening. Building security saw them exit, noted nothing unusual. They'd seen these people come and go for weeks, just another boring consulting firm. The operatives walked 3 blocks east, moving at a normal pace, not rushing, not looking back. They entered a parking garage where a rental car was waiting, registered to Alpen Strategies under one of the false identities Mossad had created. They placed the equipment case in the trunk and drove out of the garage, heading southwest toward the Austrian-Italian border. The drive would take approximately 5 hours. By the time Austrian authorities discovered what had happened, David and Maya would be across the border. Inside the gallery, Rashidi's body lay on the floor, blood pooling around his head. The gallery's security system was recording everything, but the cameras were positioned to monitor entrances and high-value artwork, not the main exhibition space where Rashidi had fallen. The footage would show him, standing, then disappearing from frame as he collapsed. It wouldn't show the bullet strike. It wouldn't show any indication of what had killed him. The discovery came at 9:47, 33 minutes after the shooting. One of Rashidi's assistants, a young woman who'd helped organize the evening's exhibition, had forgotten her phone at the gallery. She returned to retrieve it, expecting the gallery to be locked, but knowing Rashidi sometimes worked late and might still be there. She knocked on the front door. No response. She could see lights on inside. She tried calling Rashidi's mobile phone. She heard it ringing inside the gallery, but no one answered. Growing concerned, she called the gallery's business line. Again, no answer. She walked around to the side of the building where there was a service entrance. It was locked, but through a small window, she could see into the main exhibition space. She saw Rashidi on the floor. She screamed. She called the emergency services. Immediately, Austrian police arrived within 6 minutes. Paramedics followed shortly after. They entered through the front door, which they forced open, and found Rashidi dead. The blood, the head wound, the obvious violence of what had happened was immediately apparent. This was a crime scene. Vienna's Criminal Investigation Department was notified. A homicide team responded. They secured the gallery, began documenting evidence, and tried to understand what had happened. The initial assessment was confusing. Rashidi had been shot in the head, clearly, but there was no indication of how the shooter had accessed the gallery. The doors were locked from inside. The windows were intact, except they weren't. A detective examining the large street-facing windows noticed the bullet hole. Small, clean, obviously recent. The glass had been penetrated from outside. They looked across the street at the office building. Multiple windows faced the gallery from various floors. Any one of them could have been the shooting position. Austrian police began the process of securing the building across the street, identifying which offices had sight lines to the gallery, and requesting access to those spaces. By the time they reached the 4th-floor office rented by Alpen Strategies, it was nearly midnight. The office was empty. It looked like a normal consulting firm's workspace. Desks, computers, filing cabinets, the usual corporate furniture. But one window had damage, a small hole covered partially by tinted film that had been applied recently. The film was removed. The bullet hole was obvious. Investigators realized immediately that this was the shooting position. They began documenting everything, photographing the office, collecting evidence, pulling security footage from the building's surveillance system. The footage showed the 2 consultants who'd been working late. Clean images of their faces, their movements, their departure carrying an equipment case. Austrian. Intelligence was brought in immediately. They ran the faces through databases, checked the identities associated with Alpen Strategies, and began unraveling the operation. Within 24 hours, they determined that Alpen Strategies was a shell company. The Swiss address was real, but the business was fake. The consultants' identities were sophisticated forgeries. The entire operation had been an intelligence hit. The question was, which intelligence service? Austrian investigators had their suspicions. Rashidi's background, his connections to Middle Eastern financial networks, his suspected involvement in money laundering for terrorist organizations, all pointed toward Israeli motivation. Mossad was the obvious suspect, but proving it was impossible. David and Maya had crossed into Italy by 3 in the morning. They drove to Milan, abandoned the rental car in a long-term parking facility, and took separate trains to different European cities. Their false identities held up under routine border checks. Within 48 hours, they were back in Israel, traveling on different passports through different routes, leaving no trail that connected them to Vienna. The other 3 operatives on the support team had already departed Austria through various routes before the shooting even occurred. The safe houses were cleaned, rental agreements terminated, and every trace of Mossad's presence removed. Austria issued arrest warrants for the 2 individuals whose faces appeared in the building security footage. But those individuals didn't exist. The names were fake, the passports were forgeries, and the people themselves had disappeared.
And that was the Mossad. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that no one is neutral and that the government has no rights.